Welcome to Excel 2013 Statistical Analysis video number 6. Hey, if you want to download this workbook file and follow along, click on the link below the video. Hey, this video we're going to start talking about Chapter 2, Descriptive Statistics, Creating Tabular and Graphical Summaries. That just means tables with formulas or pivot tables. Graphical means charts like column, bar, and pie. Chapter 3, hey, we'll do more descriptive statistics, but we'll do numerical. Now, let's go ahead and scroll down. These are the topics for Chapter 2. Remember, we have categorical data and quantitative. Categorical is something like a label or a category. Quantitative is a number. We're going to have tabular and graphical for both. Here's the list of the tabular, the graphical for our categorical variables, and the tabular and graphical items we'll create for our quantitative variable. Now, I want to go over to notes here. And what we're going to do in this video is learn how to create a frequency distribution, a relative or percent frequency distribution, column chart or bar chart, pie chart, and even a Pareto chart. Now, check this out. Below here are notes. And if you Control P and print this out, there's 5 pages with notes about what we're going to see in this video. I'm going to click Escape. Now let's go over to FD for frequency distribution, categorical. And here we're given a data set of people's purchases for phones. So if I click on the top cell and Control down, you can see we have over 500 records here. Control Home to jump back to cell A1. And as data analysts using statistical techniques, we need to organize this into useful information. Well, a frequency distribution will allow us to count. But now let's go back over to the note sheet and just look at the definition for a frequency distribution. It's a tabular summary. First thing is we need to list all the unique values or ranges of values later when we get to a quantitative variable in a set of data called categories of classes. So obviously, we need a unique list of our phones. That'll be our categories. The categories must be collectively exhaustive. That just means you have to have enough categories so nothing's left out. So we need to get a complete list of every phone. And the categories have to be mutually exclusive. No item can fit into more than one category. That's something we more have to worry about when we get to our quantitative variable. Hey, the frequency distributions will show the number of observations, count, or frequency for each category. And the goal is to provide information about frequencies or count. Now, that doesn't seem like much, right? Information about count. But you won't believe how often it's very important to know, hey, which category has the most, right? So for phones, we want to know which phone was purchased most often, or for that matter, the least often. When we get to our quantitative variable, we want to know things like how many students got scores between 80 and 90 points. So counting, even though it seems very basic, is very important. Not only that, but these frequency distributions and the charts that we create from them will be very important throughout the entire class. All right, let's go back over here. We're going to see how to use either a formula or a pivot table. And the reason why we're going to do both, even though the textbook only does pivot tables, is because each one has its strengths and weaknesses. Now, I have a little list here, but over on the notes when you print it out, there's a complete list of the differences between the two, and we'll talk about them as we create both. Now, how are we going to get a unique list? Well, we're going to use something up in Data Ribbon. We saw filter in week 1, but we're going to use advanced filter. There's a checkbox here that will automatically extract a unique list. All right, so I'm going to click Escape. Click in the top cell, Control-Shift down arrow to highlight the whole column. One thing that's very important about extracting a unique list, you better have a field name at the top. Now, we've emphasized this heavily in the class so far, but if you use advanced filter and you don't have a field name, you'll get an incorrect list. You'll get exactly 2 of the first item because it will consider the first item a field name. No problem. We have a field name. Data. Advanced filter. Here's our dialog box. Now you just read it from top to bottom. Filter list in place? No way. We want to copy to another location. The list range, well, it got it right because we followed all our rules for a proper data set. Criteria range, well, we don't have any criteria. Copy to, we definitely want to copy it to. And I'm going to click, boop, cell D6. And here it is. It's as easy as this. As soon as you check unique records only and click OK, boom. Look at that. We get an exact listing of one for each unique item in this list over here. All right, now let's add our second column over here, and we're going to call this frequency. And enter. Now I want to use the same formatting, so I'm going to right click and on the mini toolbar hit my paintbrush. And then boop, click on frequency. Now I'm going to highlight all these cells. And up on the home ribbon, I'm going to go and get all borders. And I'm going to add that green just because that's our convention for this class. That means there'll be a formula there. All right, so what do? We use the count ifs. Now count if, that's for one condition only. I'm always going to use countifs because we can do one condition or more. Criteria range, I click on the top cell. Control-Shift-Down arrow, and F4 key because we need to put those dollar signs in to lock it. Remember, we're copying the formula down. Criteria range, that word range reminds me that I need the whole column with everything. I type a comma. Criteria, hey, that's going to be the individual phone. That's a relative cell reference, so as we copy it down, it knows to move to each new phone. That's it. Control-Enter, double-click and send it down. And there we have our frequency table. Some of the useful information we can gain in this particular sample of over 500. We can see the Samsung Galaxy 4 152 times. Apple iPhone 6 122. The one with the least, Motorola Motor G. Now, this gives us the count. Sometimes we want to see either a decimal representation or a percentage representation that shows us parts compared to the whole. So let's come down here. And what's the whole? I'm going to type total tab. And our, whoa. Now that's something new in 2013. It automatically copied the formula down. That's terrible. Now I'm going to take advantage of that. It did bring some formatting down. But if I hit F2, that is not what I want. That's new in 2013. I have never seen that before. I'm going to delete that. Now we want to add, so we're going to use not the sum button up in the home ribbon or the formulas tab. We're going to use our keyboard Alt equals. We're looking carefully. Are the dancing ants marching around the correct range? You bet. Enter. 559. I'm going to turn my Speak Cells on Enter off. Now I'm going to come back to this later and do some formatting. But for now, I'm going to highlight these two and Control B. We'll actually have a few more totals, and so we'll do a universal formatting at the end. Now we come up here, and I'm going to name this relative frequency. What does relative means? It means relative to the total, what's the decimal or percentage going to be? Now for relative frequency, we'll use this later in our probability chapters. We're always going to show it as a decimal. What this means is I need to compare 122 divided by the total, 88 divided by the total, 152 divided by the total. Relative frequency. Now I'm going to right-click, point to my paintbrush. When I see my paintbrush, I'm going to click, and boom, I formatted that. I'm going to highlight this whole column, right-click, click on the paintbrush, and boom. I love that. Look at that. It did the whole column just by clicking in the top cell. Now I'm going to do my formula. Equals relative cell reference divided by E14, and I'm absolutely going to hit F4 to lock it. That's the dollar signs. That means as I copy down, locked. The denominator is locked on 559, but each one of the blue cell references will move. Control Enter, and I'm going to not double click and send it down, and I'm going to click and drag. Now one thing that's true about this is if these are relative frequencies and we're comparing each one of the parts to the total, when I add them up, Alt equals and Enter, it better equal 1. Now that's kind of a messy decimal. We can highlight this. And when we go up to Home and decrease decimals, it's not hacking them off. See, I'm clicking it. It's just hiding them. it is displaying 4 decimals only. The actual decimals that we just hid are still in the cell. For example, if I were to come down here, and you don't have to do this, but I'm going to show you because I want to emphasize something important about number formatting. If I say truncate, the truncate function will truncate. It's looking at that number underneath, and I'm going to say hack off everything after 4. And when I Control Enter, it looks the same. If I were to highlight both of these cells and increase the decimals, you can see that sure enough, it's not the same. Those decimals are still there. Control ZZ. You don't have to do this, but I'm just doing this as an exercise to emphasize. Now I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to Alt equals Control Enter. And you can see that if we actually hacked off the decimals underneath, meaning everything after the 4th position to the right, we would not get 1. Up here, we do get 1 when that sum function adds, because all those decimals are just hiding underneath. Now, why do we always have to get 1? Or later when we do our percent frequency column, why do we get 100%? Because the categories are collectively exhaustive. That means we have enough categories, and they're mutually exclusive. We're not going to get a count of a particular item in 2 different categories. All right, now we're going to add a column for percent frequency. And I'm actually going to show you how to do it 2 ways. The way I prefer, and I'm going to show you the way the textbook does it, which does have some uses occasionally. Now, I'm going to cheat here. I'm going to highlight this whole column and right-click, and I'm going to double-click. Whoop, that. And now watch. 1, 2. I copied the whole. Don't click over here, because if I click right now, remember I double clicked it, so wherever I click, it's still going. You see the dancing ants right there. But notice it took all the formatting and boop, boop, all the way down. Now I'm going to click Escape to turn off that. Double click for the paintbrush. Now we're going to have 2 columns. Percent frequency, Control Enter, Control C, and Control V, just so I have the same column there. Now, since I'm going to use this as a label, and it might show up in the charting engine, I'm going to put a little note up here. Number format tab, space times 100, just so I know. Now I'm going to highlight both columns. And with both of them selected, I'm going to click and drag so I have enough space for the number formatting. All right. Now, percent frequency, when using number format, that's the way I prefer, because then we can use any of these numbers freely in any subsequent calculation. We saw a great example back in week 1 of why this method is useful. So if I'm going to use percent number formatting based on this decimal, I'm not going to recreate the whole formula. I'm just doing a relative cell reference, Control Enter, and copy it down. Now I'm going to go up to the Home ribbon, Number drop down, and select percentage with 2 decimals. Same thing here. There's a bunch of extra decimals there. Hey, when I come down to the bottom and Alt equals and Enter, 100%. Now, the beauty of this method is those decimals are still under there. So if we ever reference one of these cells in a formula, we'll be using the correct number. Now, this method is going to involve taking the same relative frequency and multiplying it times 100. The problem with this is that it changes the number. It's not 0.218247 anymore. It's 21. So if you use that in any subsequent calculations, your result will be too big. Now, the reason that this method is around is because you want to display the percentages without the percentage symbol. Sometimes in some reports or tabular summaries or charts, the percentage symbol all over the place gets a little busy. Now I'm going to decrease the decimals. And we can see we get the same looking thing without the percentage symbol. If I come down here and Alt equals, it's going to give me 100. But that's actually the integer 100. All right, so I showed you this and the logic for why it's occasionally used. I mentioned in week 1 the reason that I don't use this method and always use this method is because looking at spreadsheets for 2 decades, I just see too many errors when people do formulas like this. No problem. If you want to use it, you can, but only when you're using these numbers in some sort of tabular or graphical display where you don't want the percentage symbol. Hey, now we want to come down to this last row, and I'm going to highlight the whole row. And we got to talk about borders. And we're going to use format cells, which is home, and any one of these dialog launchers. And I'm going to use the keyboard Control-1. And the nice thing about the Format Cells dialog box is it has the Number tab, Alignment, Font, Border, Fill, and even Protection. Now we want border. And the nice thing about the dialog boxes is they have everything, all the options, whereas the ribbon tabs don't have as many options sometimes. Now by default, it comes with an outline. And I'm going to clear this. And what an outline means is notice we have something highlighted here, and there's some lines inside the outline. So if I click Outline, it's only the outside. Only the outside's edges would get lines here, nothing inside. As soon as I click Inside, that means it does inside as well. Now what we want is we want a dark line. So the order is you pick your line, boop. Then you select your color if you want, but our default is fine, and you click. Now you could use these buttons here, but I like to draw it. Boop, and you just click. Line, color, and then boop. And there we have it. That's the famous dark line and a double line to indicate this is the bottom line. Click OK. Hey, that didn't do anything. But if I click outside, sure enough, I can see that the borders are looking good. Now, for printing, we would not have all of these columns. We did all these columns just as we're learning how to build a frequency distribution. Now, I want to look at the pivot table next, and then we'll look at charts from the various columns. We'll select A1. We have a proper data set. So we go up to Insert, Pivot Table. Or we use the keyboard Alt-N-V. I'm going to select Existing Worksheet. The location will be cell J16. Click OK. Now let's scroll over, and we'll build our pivot table. Now remember, there's only one field. And the remarkable thing is when I click and drag down to rows, instantly I get a unique list. That is fast and easy. One of the big advantages of pivot tables is that they are fast and easy. We'll compare and contrast the formula in pivot table in just a bit. Now, we want to then drag the field down to values. Instantly, because it's a text field, we get count. Let's rename these columns. This is the frequency. I can click and drag. That is amazing and fast. Now we want to add relative frequency and percent frequency. That's going to require that we drag our field a couple times down to values. But first, let's pull the bottom of the field list. I don't know if there's enough room, so I'm going to point to the middle. And when I see my white vertical arrow, I click and drag. Now I'm going to drag it once. That sign means no, 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 no. When you see that blue, then you can drag and drop. Let's do it again. We're not going to use the field list anymore, so I will close it. Now let's rename relative frequency tab, percent frequency, and enter. Now watch this. We got the count by default, but we need to change this so that it's comparing each one of the counts to the column total. Right-click in the Values area and point to Show Values As. There's all sorts of amazing calculations that we'll use throughout the statistics class. But look at this, percent of column total. There's also a percent of row total, which we'll use in percent of grand total. Hey, percent of column total, you got to be kidding me. Now, the default is to show percent number format. For relative frequency, we don't want that. So right-click. And we were using value field settings as our one-stop shopping. But if it's just number formatting, come to the number formatting. This does not exist if you come out and right-click a cell. It's only in a pivot table that you can format the actual field with number formatting. Now, if I click General, I have all those decimals, and I don't want that. I want to display them 4 decimals. Click OK. Now, right-click. You've got to be kidding me. Show Values As. Percent of column total, done. Now, the pivot table is fast and easy. The actual calculation where we multiply by the 100 is much harder to do in a pivot table than it is to do with formulas. You'll see in the textbook they do that calculation outside of the pivot table. I do want to compare and contrast the pivot table to the formula. Now, the first thing we want to know is that formulas instantly update if your source data changes. Pivot tables don't instantly update. So let's just copy. And before I paste to change this, watch the calculations here and over here. Control V. Instantly this updates. This does not. Now it's not hard. It's simple. You have to come over to the pivot table and right-click refresh, and then it updates. Sometimes, like if you have sample data that you're dumping into your template over and over, then the formulas look pretty darn good because they're instantly updating. However, the advantage to the pivot table is that it's super easy to calculate. Another advantage to formulas that don't apply in this particular situation, there's many functions and formula possibilities that just don't exist in a pivot table. The last difference we'll see when we create our chart. All of these columns will automatically show up in any chart, whereas when we build it with formulas, we can pick and choose our columns for charts. All right, now let's build a column chart. I'm going to zoom in a bit. I'm going to build the first couple of charts off of the formulas, and then we'll build one off the pivot table. Now, I just want to highlight the actual phone names and the frequency. Do not highlight the total. Boom. And now let's go to Insert, and we are going to do a column. Click the drop down, and we want the first one. Now, in the textbook, they call this either a bar chart, or later when we use this column for cross-tabulated, they'll call it side-by-side. But in Excel, it's called a clustered column. We'll use these two later when we do cross-tabulation, or we'll use all three for cross-tabulation. So clustered column, and there's our chart. Now let's fix it up a little bit. I don't like this title. Select the title when you see that solid line. Type an equal sign immediately. There's an equal sign in the formula bar. Click on cell A1, enter. So we have our title. Now that's a pretty good column chart right now. One thing that's nice about it is this vertical axis. The numbers are neatly placed off to the side. I like to put, for some column charts and histograms that we'll see next video, the frequencies right on top. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the axis and hit delete. We also want to delete the horizontal lines. Make sure you select not the outside, but the inside. Now, those lines are important when you have the numbers in your vertical axis, but we're not going to have those, so delete. Now, let's select the column. And notice that they're all selected. When I right-click, I can open the task pane with either Format Data Series or Control-1. I want to go to the bucket of paint, fill. And down at the bottom, I want vary colors by point. Now let's go over to the series options, or the little columns, and click. One thing you don't want to do with categorical data is select 0 gap width. That's left for continuous quantitative variables, which we'll see next video. I'm going to leave it at maybe 100%, 100, and enter. Now I can close the task pane. I want to add the frequencies at the top, so I click the plus. I love this, data labels. Boop, just like that. So we have a column chart. The order of the labels at the bottom do not relay any information. The information comes from the heights of the column. We can quickly see that the green one is the biggest, and the little teal one is the smallest. Now I want to do a second column chart from the percent frequency column over here. I'm going to point to the edge, and when I see my move cursor, I can click and drag. Now, something that's hard to do with a pivot table is if I want to click and select the phone names and then hold Control to click and select a second column. Notice I don't have the totals. You can't just pick and choose columns from a pivot table, but you can do that from a set of formulas. Insert, column, and then clustered column. This one, I'm going to Control-1 to open up. And on the series, I'm going to select 100%. 100 and enter. The only other thing I'm going to change is I'm going to select the title, equal sign, click in A1 and enter. I'll close the task pane. So we have our percent frequency and our actual frequency. Here are two options. They're equally acceptable. Oftentimes, it's based on people's preferences. Now, let's go ahead, and I'm going to copy this chart, Control-C, and then right below, I'm going to Control-V. We talked about in week 1 how if you turn a column chart on its side, it's a bar chart. And sometimes for emphasizing differences, that's better. Or when you have long titles, I'm going to right-click in the white area and point to Change Chart Type. And let's go to bar, click OK. There's a comparison. They're relaying the same information in slightly different forms. Another way you can relay this information, let's copy this chart. I select the outside edge, Control-C. I click below, Control-V. Now let's right-click and let's change it to Change Chart Type. And we'll change it to a pie. Now notice the pie will come out with the automatic colors. These colors are based on the themes that you select in your workbook. Now let's go to the plus, because for pie charts we have a few more options for data labels. I'm going to click the arrow and then more options. This opens up the task pane. Category name, percentage, uncheck values. I immediately can see that it's kind of crowded, so let's push these out. I'm going to come back over the task pane. Label position, let's say outside end. Still a little bit crowded, but check this out. I'm going to select the actual pie, come back over to the task pane. And actually, one nice thing is the different elements that you select in the chart, the task pane changes. And look at this angle of first slice. Now watch, here's the green one. I'm going to slide this a little bit. Maybe to like 36 or something, and there we have it. If you wanted, I kind of like that, right? If you wanted, sometimes you have to click on a label, click on it a second time, and drag it out to get a leader line. That leader line comes from over in the columns label options, show leader line. I'm going to undo that, Control-Z, because I kind of liked it. Without the leader lines, there's less clutter. So there's 4 different charts for relaying the information for categorical data from a frequency distribution. Now I want to close the task pane and go look at the pivot table. I'm going to use the horizontal scroll bar and scroll over here. Now, even though this is kind of over top of it, I'm going to move it to the side. The problem with the pivot table, and it's an easy one to solve, but this. If your goal is to have this tabular report, and you want frequency, relative frequency, and percentage frequency in the same report, any chart built off of this pivot table will automatically take all the columns. Hey, just click in a single cell. Or let's do this. Let's highlight, use Control, and all I want is the percentages, right? So I've highlighted just like I would with formulas. Insert, column chart, column. You can already see the problem here. All of the columns are coming in. Now you can barely see it down there because they're little percentages. But even if you hid them, you still have the problem with this weird gap width. Now we can, in most situations, go up to Design, Select Data. That's the trick. Later in this class, we'll use this to really create charts that normally can't be created. And look at this. If we want to edit any of the series, all the buttons are grayed out. So the solution is, and I'm going to delete this. So the solution is to build individual pivot tables, one for frequency, one for percent frequency. But if you want all your calculations in the pivot table, then you have to switch over and do something like this formula table. Now I want to go over to this next sheet, data product, and we're going to see that really a lot of times we want to use pivot tables. Here's a different example. We have a product. This is Boomerang Name. It's a list of all of the products we sold. Control down arrow. So there's like 200. Control home. All I want to do is create a pivot table of frequency and a percent frequency. Insert pivot table, or Alt-NV, existing sheet, location, C1, click OK. I'm going to drag down to rows. We get a unique list. Drag down to values. We get a count. Click in cell C1, type product, tab, frequency, enter. Now watch this. We're going to copy this. Control C and paste it right below. Control V. Right click, show values as percent of column total. Click in the cell, hit F2, and I'm going to type percent before frequency and enter. I can change the column width up here. Now we have our two tables. I can close the field list. Click in a single cell, insert, column. Notice we get field buttons. I'm going to right click, hide all field buttons on chart. Click on the title, start typing product count, and enter. Click on our legend and delete. Click in a cell, insert, column. Click on the title, equal sign. I'm going to click on the cell with percent frequency and enter. Right click, hide all field buttons. Delete. Point to the corner, click and drag. I'm not going to worry about the exact layout, but that's how you do it. And oftentimes, when you want multiple charts, quite a bit easier to do it with a pivot table. Hey, two last points about this categorical video. We want to go over and look at the sheet discrete column. This is not a categorical variable. This is a quantitative variable. We're going to count the number of heads in 3 flips of a coin. We'll actually do this in Chapter 4 when we're talking about probability. And because this is a discrete, not a continuous quantitative variable, discrete means we're counting, right? 0, 1, 2, 3. There are gaps. We can't have 0.5 or 1.75. When you have a discrete quantitative variable, then you want to use columns with gaps. The gaps indicate that we are counting 0, 1, 2, 3. The last topic we want to look over on the sheet, Pareto. Now this type of chart is just mentioned in a 1-sentence blurb in the margin. But I did want to show you a picture of it. It's categorical data, data from customers that say why they're dissatisfied with the product. And the only difference here is we have our unique list, our count. The frequency is sorted from most complaints. That's for the bad finish. The next most, unattractive design. The next most, did not work, all the way down to the one that got the fewest selections by customers, no instructions. So this column is sorted. Then we do a cumulative percent. This chart is for quality control, where you list the reason for dissatisfaction with the most frequency or highest percentage first, sorted in this direction. We're not going to create this in this class. There's a reference video here if you want to learn how to create this. I've done this in other statistics series. All right, we're going to scroll over here. We did a few things here. We saw how to create frequency tables, percent frequencies with a pivot table and pivot chart. We also saw how to do it with formulas and pivot tables and compared and contrast the benefits and drawbacks of each. And then we saw percent frequency chart, a pie chart, a bar chart, and a column with frequencies. All right, next video we'll start quantitative variables and figure out how to do frequency distributions and charts for those. All right, we'll see you next video.